Hello, and welcome back to Grave Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy whispers rising straight from the grave, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1, listen carefully, because I do not plan to tell this story again. I have spent months trying to convince myself that what happened was only a misunderstanding, a terrible chain of ordinary events made worse by exhaustion and fear. But every time I remember that night, I know I am lying to myself. The worst part is that you probably would have done exactly what I did. You would have followed the same routine, entered the same building, chosen the same chair, and waited for your clothes to finish washing. You would have believed that nothing truly dangerous could happen in a brightly lit public place surrounded by traffic, apartment buildings, and late-night stores. Most of us live inside a bubble of false safety. We wake up, work, eat, travel home, and repeat the same habits every day. After enough time, those habits begin to feel permanent. We start to believe that our routines are protected paths, almost like invisible tracks carrying us safely from one day to the next. I believed that too. I thought danger belonged to dark forests, empty highways, or abandoned houses. I thought real terror needed a masked killer, a hidden weapon, or some inhuman creature waiting beneath a bed. I never imagined that the most frightening night of my life would begin with a middle-aged woman washing clothes. There was no screaming when she entered, no sudden attack, no dramatic warning telling me to run. There was only the steady turning of washing machines and a silence so heavy that it seemed to poison the air. That night taught me something I wish I had never learned. Some people do not watch your entire life. They do not need to follow you every day or learn everything about you. They only watch the empty spaces between your habits. They notice when you are alone. They notice when you are tired. They notice the places you visit when no one expects you to be there. Then they wait for the moment when your routine leaves you unprotected. That moment came for me inside a laundromat on Devon Avenue in Chicago. It was during one of the hottest weeks of the summer. Even after midnight, the city felt trapped beneath a thick blanket of heat. The sidewalks gave off warmth from the day, and the air smelled of car exhaust, hot pavement, and food from restaurants that remained open long after most people had gone to bed. I worked the night shift at the time. My schedule was the opposite of almost everyone I knew. I usually returned home near sunrise and slept through most of the day. On my nights off, I often found myself awake when the rest of the city had gone quiet. Because of that schedule, I had developed the habit of doing my laundry at around 2 in the morning. There was a self-service laundromat on Devon Avenue that stayed open 24 hours a day. It was not a pleasant place, but it was convenient. During the afternoon, it was usually crowded with families, children, and people carrying baskets full of clothing. At 2 in the morning, however, it was almost always empty. I liked the silence. After spending hours working around noise, bright screens, and impatient people, the empty laundromat felt like a private room. I could wash my clothes, read a book, and enjoy an hour in which no one expected anything from me. The building was narrow and deeper than it looked from the street. 2 long rows of washing machines filled the center of the room, while dryers covered most of the walls. The floor was made of cracked gray concrete. Plastic chairs were placed beside folding tables that had been scratched and stained over the years. Several fluorescent tubes hung from the ceiling. They gave off a pale light that made everything look sickly and colorless. One of the lights near the back flickered every few seconds, while another produced a constant electric hum. The air always smelled of detergent, dust, chlorine, and damp fabric. There were security cameras in the corners, but I had never seen anyone working there at night. A handwritten sign beside the change machine said that the owner was not responsible for lost or stolen property. That night, I arrived a little after 2. I parked near the front window and carried in a bag containing work shirts, jeans, socks, and a few towels. The street outside was quiet. A grocery store across the road had closed hours earlier, and only the red glow of its sign remained. No other cars were parked near the laundromat. I remember feeling relieved when I saw that the place was empty. I loaded my clothes into a machine near the front, added detergent, inserted several coins, and pressed the start button. Water rushed into the drum, and the machine began its slow, familiar cycle. I chose a chair where I could see both the entrance and my washing machine. Then, I opened the paperback novel I had brought with me. For the first 20 minutes, nothing unusual happened. The machines continued turning in a dull, repeating rhythm. Every few minutes, a car passed outside, its headlights moving across the front windows before disappearing down the street. The air conditioner struggled against the summer heat, blowing weak streams of warm air through a dusty vent. I became lost in my book. Then, the front door opened. The metal bell attached above it gave a weak jingle. The sound was so sudden in the empty building that I looked up immediately. A woman stood in the doorway. She looked to be somewhere in her late 40s or early 50s. Her face was pale and exhausted, and deep lines surrounded her mouth and eyes. Her dark hair had been tied loosely behind her head, but several wet strands clung to her forehead. What struck me first was her coat. It was long, heavy, and dark brown, the kind of coat someone might wear during a cold Chicago winter. The temperature outside was still close to 80 degrees, yet she had buttoned the coat almost to her neck. Behind her, she dragged a large canvas laundry bag. It was much bigger than the bag I had brought. The bottom scraped across the floor as she pulled it inside, and the weight of it seemed to strain her shoulder. For a moment, I thought she might collapse. I nearly asked whether she needed help. Then the smell reached me. At first, I thought something had spoiled in a nearby trash bin. It was a thick, greasy smell that reminded me of meat left cooking for far too long. Beneath it was another odor, sour and damp, like old water trapped inside a basement. The woman pulled the door shut behind her. She did not look at me. Most people give some small sign when they enter an empty place and find another person inside. They nod, smile, or at least glance in the other person's direction. She did none of those things. She stared towards the back of the laundromat and began dragging the bag between the rows of machines. Her shoes made no sound. Only the rough bottom of the bag scraped against the concrete. She stopped at washing machine number 12. I knew the number because it was printed in faded black paint above the coin slot. Machine 12 sat in the darkest corner of the room beneath the flickering fluorescent light. It was older than the others and had several rust marks around the door. I had used it once before, but it shook so badly during the spin cycle that I never used it again. The woman placed her bag on the floor and opened it. I lowered my eyes towards my book, but I continued watching her from the edge of my vision. She began removing clothing from the bag. The first thing she pulled out was a man's white shirt. At least, I think it had once been white. Most of the fabric was covered in brown and black stains. One sleeve had been torn almost completely away. She pushed it into the machine. Next came a pair of dark trousers, then another shirt, then what looked like a jacket. Every piece of clothing appeared damaged. Some had long tears across the fabric. Others were so heavily stained that it was impossible to guess their original color. They did not look like clothes worn during an ordinary day. They looked like clothes taken from an accident. I tried to convince myself that she worked at a hospital, a butcher shop, or a restaurant. There were dozens of reasonable explanations. Perhaps the smell came from food. Perhaps the stains were oil, wine, or chemicals. Yet the more clothing she pulled from the bag, the less I believed those explanations. All of the clothes appeared to belong to men. The shirts were large. The trousers were long and heavy. I noticed the remains of a leather belt hanging from one pair, its buckle dark and scratched. The woman did not use detergent. She shoved the clothes inside the drum, closed the door, and selected cold water. Then she inserted coins and started the machine. She remained standing in front of it. Most people sit down while waiting for a load to wash. Some look at their phones or walk outside. The woman stood perfectly still, her face close to the round glass door, watching the clothes turn. The flickering light above her made her shadow jump across the wall. I looked down at my book again, although I had stopped reading. My eyes moved over the same paragraph again and again without understanding a single sentence. After several minutes, the woman opened her bag once more. She removed another shirt but did not place it into the machine. Instead, she spread it over the folding table beside her. From inside her coat, she produced a piece of rough cloth and a small plastic bottle. She poured clear liquid onto the stained shirt and began rubbing the fabric. Her movements were slow at first. Then they became violent. She pressed both hands against the cloth and scrubbed so hard that the table shook. Her knuckles turned white. The sound of fabric scraping against plastic joined the steady hum of the machines. She continued for several minutes without stopping. I became aware that my own washing machine had entered its rinse cycle. Water moved through the pipes with a deep groan. I considered gathering my things and leaving, but my clothes were still locked inside the machine. I told myself I was being foolish. The woman had not threatened me. She had barely acknowledged my presence. Leaving all my clothes behind because someone was acting strangely would have felt ridiculous. Then, something fell from her bag. It struck the floor with a faint metallic ring and rolled beneath the edge of the folding table. The woman did not seem to notice. Without thinking, I stood and moved towards it. The object had stopped near her left shoe. I bent down, expecting to find a coin, a key, or perhaps a button. Before I could see it clearly, her shoe moved. She placed her foot directly over the object. I froze. Slowly, I raised my head. She was looking down at me. Her eyes were wide and red. The skin beneath them was dark, as if she had not slept properly in weeks. Her thick eyebrows drew together, and her mouth remained slightly open. Up close, the smell coming from her coat was much stronger. It was not just sweat. It was not dirty laundry. It smelled like bleach covering something rotten. "Do not touch something that does not belong to you," she said. Her voice was rough and damaged, almost like she had been breathing smoke. For a second, I could not answer. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "I thought you dropped something." She did not blink. I stepped backwards and returned to my chair. My legs felt weak. I sat down, opened my book, and pretended to read. The words on the page had begun to shake because my hands were trembling. The woman bent down and picked up the object. I saw it for only a moment before she slipped it into her coat pocket. It appeared to be a ring, not an ordinary ring, but a thick silver band large enough to fit a man's finger. I tried not to look at her again. A few minutes later, machine 12 began making an unusual sound. Something hard was striking the inside of the metal drum. Clang, 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 the sound repeated with every turn. The woman stood in front of the machine without reacting. Whatever was trapped inside was heavy enough to shake the door. Clang, 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 my mind began offering explanations. A belt buckle, loose coins, metal buttons, work tools forgotten inside a pocket. But I had watched her load the clothes. I had seen no tools or heavy objects. The woman returned to scrubbing the shirt on the table. A few drops of liquid splashed onto the floor. One landed several feet from my chair. The smell filled the laundromat almost immediately. My stomach tightened. I had never been inside a morgue, but the smell made me think of one. It was a mixture of strong chemicals and decaying meat. The bleach did not hide the rotten odor. It only made it sharper. I raised the collar of my shirt over my nose. That was when I noticed something hanging from the door of machine 12. At first, I thought it was a loose thread. It was black, thin, and several inches long. It moved slightly each time the drum turned. As the machine shook, more of it slipped from beneath the rubber edge of the door. I stared at it. The thread was too smooth and too thick to have come from fabric. It was hair. A long strand of human hair had become trapped in the washing machine door. I looked at the clothes turning behind the glass. Pink water rolled between the shirts and trousers. Each time the metal object struck the drum, dark shapes rose and fell inside. My entire body went cold. This woman was not simply washing dirty clothes. She was cleaning evidence. The thought entered my mind with complete certainty. Once it did, I could not force it away. The stains were blood. The smell came from death. The metal object that had fallen from the bag belonged to someone who might never need it again. I wondered whether the security cameras were working. I looked towards the nearest one and saw no red light. Dust covered the lens. Machine 12 began shaking more violently. A thin stream of water leaked from beneath it and spread across the concrete floor. The liquid was pale pink. The woman watched it move towards her shoes. She smiled. It was not a large smile. The corners of her mouth lifted slightly, as if the sight had reminded her of something pleasant. That small expression frightened me more than anything else she had done. I could no longer remain there. I stood so quickly that my chair slid backwards and struck the wall. My book fell from my lap and landed open on the floor. The woman turned her head towards me. "I need to go," I said. I do not know why I spoke. Perhaps I wanted to make my movements seem normal. Perhaps I hoped that if I acted polite, she would let me leave. My clothes were still inside the washing machine near the front. I did not wait for the door to unlock. I did not take my book. I walked towards the exit. Every step felt too loud. I expected the woman to grab me from behind. I expected to hear her shoes crossing the floor or feel her hand close around my shoulder. Instead, I heard her voice. You forgot something, my friend. I stopped. My first thought was that she meant my book or the clothes still turning inside my machine. Then I looked back. She was holding my wallet. I instinctively reached towards the back pocket of my jeans. It was empty. The wallet must have fallen when I stood up earlier, perhaps when I bent down near her feet. I had not noticed. She held it in both hands and slowly opened it. "Please put that down," I said. She ignored me. She removed my driver's license and held it beneath the flickering light. Her eyes moved across the card. Then she read my full name aloud. Hearing my name in her damaged voice made the laundromat feel even smaller. She looked at the photograph, then at me. "This is you," she said. I did not answer. She lowered her eyes to the address printed beneath my name. Then she read that aloud, too. Every number, every word. My home address echoed through the laundromat. She smiled again. "A very beautiful address," she said. "Quiet street." I could not breathe. She tilted the license between her fingers as though studying something valuable. "Quiet enough," she continued, "for people to do many things without anyone hearing." I took one step towards her before stopping. I wanted my wallet, but I could not make myself move any closer. "Keep the money," I said. "Just leave me alone." She gave a soft laugh. There was almost no money inside. She placed the driver's license back into the wallet and set it on the folding table. "The clothes will be clean by morning," she said. "Then I will go home too." The machine behind her struck the metal object again. Clang, she looked towards it, then back at me. "There is no need for anyone to know what happened here." Her words sounded like a warning, but also like an agreement she expected me to accept. I turned and ran. I pushed through the front door so hard that it struck the wall. The bell above it rang wildly. Hot air hit my face as I crossed the pavement towards my car. I fumbled with my keys and dropped them beside the driver's door. For several seconds, I could not pick them up because my fingers were shaking too badly. I looked back through the laundromat window. The woman had not followed me. She stood beside machine 12, watching from the darkest part of the room. Even from across the parking area, I could see her face turned towards me. I finally unlocked the car and threw myself inside. I locked every door before starting the engine. As I pulled away, I saw an old, dark-colored sedan parked around the side of the building. I had not noticed it when I arrived. Its windows were tinted, and there appeared to be something large covered with plastic across the back seat. I drove home much faster than I should have. Several times I checked the rearview mirror. Whenever I saw headlights behind me, I thought the old sedan was following. I changed lanes without warning and turned down streets I did not normally use. My hands shook so badly that I nearly struck a concrete barrier near an underpass. When I reached my neighborhood, no vehicle appeared to be behind me. That should have made me feel safe. It did not. My home was a small rented house on a quiet residential street. Most of my neighbors were older people who went to sleep early. At 3 in the morning, every window was dark. The woman had been right. It was a quiet address. I parked in the driveway and ran to the front door. Once inside, I locked the deadbolt, fastened the chain, and pushed a chair beneath the handle. Then I checked every window. I closed the curtains in the living room and switched off all the lights. I did not want anyone outside to see where I was. I sat on the floor in the corner with my phone in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. I considered calling the police. But what could I tell them? A strange woman had washed stained clothing at a laundromat. She had picked up my wallet and read my address. I had seen hair trapped in a machine and pink water leaking onto the floor. I had no proof of a crime. I had not seen a body. I had not even taken a photograph. The police might check the laundromat and find nothing except an empty washing machine and an abandoned book. The woman might tell them that I had frightened her. I also feared that calling anyone would break the silent agreement she believed we had made. She had told me there was no need for anyone to know. I remained awake until sunrise. Every sound made me grip the knife more tightly. Pipes moved inside the walls. Tree branches scratched against the siding. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked twice and then stopped. At around 6 in the morning, I began to relax. The sky outside had turned gray. Soon my neighbors would wake up. Cars would fill the street. Delivery trucks would begin moving through the neighborhood. I thought I had made it through the night. Then, I heard a car engine. It slowed in front of my house. The vehicle stopped. I did not move from the floor. Through a small space between the curtains, I saw the front of an old, dark sedan parked beside the curb. It looked like the car that had been outside the laundromat. The engine turned off. A door opened. Then it closed. I heard footsteps moving towards my house. They were slow and steady. Whoever was walking did not try to remain quiet. 3 knocks sounded against my front door. Not loud, not angry. The knocks were calm, precise, and confident. It was the way someone might knock when they had come to collect something that belonged to them. I held my breath. Another 3 knocks came. I waited for a voice, but no one spoke. After nearly a minute, I forced myself to crawl towards the door. I stood slowly and looked through the peephole. No one was on the porch. The street appeared empty. The old sedan was gone. For several minutes, I remained behind the locked door. Then I noticed something at the bottom edge of the peephole. A plastic bag had been placed on the doorstep. I should have left it there. I should have called the police immediately. Instead, I removed the chair, released the chain, and opened the door only a few inches. The porch was empty. A clear plastic bag sat in front of me. Inside was one of the work shirts I had left in the washing machine. It had been washed, dried, and folded with perfect care. I picked up the bag and brought it inside. The shirt smelled strongly of bleach. When I unfolded it, I saw dark stains across the chest and sleeves. They had not been there before. Some were brown, others were nearly black. Near the collar, several long strands of black hair had been folded into the fabric. I dropped the shirt. Something small struck the floor. It was a thick silver ring. The same ring that had fallen from the woman's laundry bag. I called the police after that. 2 officers came to the house. I told them everything, though I left out some details because I feared they would think I was imagining things. They went to the laundromat later that morning. Machine 12 was empty. The floor had been cleaned. My book was gone. The security cameras had not recorded anything because the system had been disconnected for several weeks. The owner claimed he had no idea who the woman was. He said no employee had been present at that hour and that people often came and went without being noticed. The old sedan could not be found. The ring did not have any clear fingerprints. The stains on my shirt were difficult to identify because the fabric had been soaked in chemicals. The police took it as evidence, but I never received a clear answer about what they found. They told me to call if I saw the woman again. I moved out of the house less than a month later. I changed my phone number, replaced my driver's license, and stopped using public laundromats. I bought a small washing machine for my apartment, even though I could barely afford it. Yet none of that made me feel safe. Sometimes I find my clothes folded differently from the way I left them. Sometimes I wake during the night and smell bleach in the hallway. Once, I found a strand of long black hair trapped inside the door of my washing machine, though no one with black hair had entered my apartment. I threw the machine away. A few weeks later, an envelope appeared beneath my front door. There was no name, stamp, or return address. Inside was a small piece of white cloth covered in a dark brown stain. Written across it in faded ink were 4 words: "The clothes are never clean." I moved again after that. I no longer live in Chicago, and I will not say where I live now. I do not follow a fixed schedule. I avoid returning home by the same route. I never visit stores at the same hour twice in 1 week. Still, I sometimes see an old dark sedan parked across the street. It is never there for long. Perhaps the woman never intended to kill me. Perhaps she only wanted to frighten me into silence. Perhaps she wanted me to understand that she could find me whenever she wished. Or perhaps the entire thing was planned before I ever entered the laundromat. Maybe she already knew my name. Maybe she had been watching the empty spaces in my routine, waiting for the night when I would be alone. I still do not know what was inside Machine 12. I do not know who owned the bloody clothing, the ring, or the long black hair. What I know is that my ordinary life ended that night. The door I locked each evening no longer felt like protection. It became only another mark showing where I could be found. My address was not a home anymore. It was a location written on someone's list. Since that night, I have lived with the feeling that I am not a person to her. I am only another piece of stained fabric, waiting to be collected. And no matter how many times I move, hide, or try to cleanse my life of what happened, I fear that one morning I will hear those same calm knocks on my door. Then I will find another clear plastic bag waiting outside. Only next time, there may not be a shirt inside. Story 2. I was 15 years old the first time I truly believed that someone was trying to get inside my house. This happened in the late 1990s, before everyone carried a cell phone and before home security cameras were common. We had one family computer in the spare room, but it was slow, loud, and mostly used by my father for work. The internet came through the phone line, so nobody could call the house while someone was online. We did not have cameras above the doors or an alarm system connected to a security company. We had ordinary locks, thick curtains, and neighbors who were supposed to notice if something strange happened. Until that night, those things had always seemed like enough. My parents were going out for date night. That was unusual because they almost never went anywhere without my brother and me. My father worked long hours, and my mother always seemed busy with the house, school events, groceries, and everything else that held our family together. Whenever they did go out, they usually left us with our grandparents. That night was different. My little brother was spending the night at my grandparents' house. I had been invited too, but I refused to go. I was 15, and I thought I was too old to be treated like a child. I had been asking my parents for months to let me stay home alone. "I'll be fine," I kept telling them. My mother was not convinced. "What will you do if someone comes to the door?" she asked. "I won't answer it." "What if the power goes out?" "I'll use a flashlight." "What if there's an emergency?" "I'll call you." "We'll be at the restaurant," my father said. You know the number, right? I told him I did, even though I had never called the restaurant before. We have neighbors, I said, and I know how to lock the doors. I wanted them to see me as responsible. I promised not to invite anyone over. I promised not to use the stove. I promised to keep the doors locked and call if anything happened. After a long discussion, they finally agreed. At the time, it felt like a victory. My mother checked every door before leaving. She locked the back door, tested the windows, and reminded me not to open the front door for anyone. My father wrote the restaurant number on a small piece of paper and placed it beside the cordless phone. "We'll be back before midnight," he said. "I know. Call if you need anything." "I will." My mother hugged me before she left. I acted annoyed, but after the front door closed and their car pulled away, the house suddenly felt much larger than it had a few minutes earlier. For the first time, I was completely alone. At first, I loved it. There was no one telling me to lower the television, no little brother asking questions during the movie, no parents walking through the room and checking what I was watching. I had the entire living room to myself. My mother had bought a frozen pizza for me. I put it in the oven and watched the clock carefully, because I had promised not to burn anything. When it was ready, I carried the whole pizza into the living room on a large plate. I had a bag of popcorn, a can of soda, and a stack of rented VHS movies sitting beside the television. I remember feeling very grown up. I turned the television louder than my parents would have allowed. I left my shoes in the middle of the floor. I ate while sitting on the carpet instead of at the dining table. The cordless phone rested on the coffee table within easy reach, just in case my parents called. Even though I was enjoying the freedom, I left every light in the living room on. I would never have admitted it at the time, but I was not brave enough to sit alone in a dark house. The hallway light was on too, along with the kitchen light. I told myself it was only because I wanted to see where I was going. The truth was that the dark rooms made me uncomfortable. Without my family there, the house did not feel familiar. It felt empty. Every room seemed deeper. The hallway looked longer. Shadows rested in corners where I had never noticed them before. Small sounds that normally disappeared beneath conversation and movement suddenly became clear. The refrigerator made a low humming sound from the kitchen. The heating system clicked inside the walls. Branches brushed lightly against one of the upstairs windows whenever the wind moved. I kept reminding myself that these sounds happened every night. I simply never noticed them, because the house was usually full of people. The first movie ended at around 9 o'clock. The screen went dark, and the sudden silence filled the room. I sat still for a few moments, holding a handful of popcorn. The ticking clock above the fireplace seemed much louder than before. Wind pressed gently against the windows. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator stopped humming, leaving behind a silence so complete that I could hear my own breathing. It was the kind of quiet that made every small sound seem important. I stood up and removed the tape from the VH player. Back then, rental stores expected customers to rewind tapes before returning them. There were even stickers on the cases that said, "Be kind, rewind." I pushed the tape back into the machine and pressed the rewind button. The machine began making its familiar mechanical noise. I bent down to pick up the next movie. That was when I heard the scraping. It was soft at first, metal against metal. I stopped moving. The sound came from the front door. For a second, I thought it might have been part of the movie, even though the movie had ended. Then I heard it again. Scrape, a short pause. Then another slow scrape. I stood with the next VH tape halfway out of its case, staring toward the door. The sound was not coming from the television. It was real. It sounded exactly like someone was placing a key into the front door lock, pulling it out, and trying another one. My stomach tightened. At first, I almost smiled. My parents must have forgotten something. Maybe my mother had left her purse on the kitchen counter. Maybe my father was trying to open the door while holding something in his hands. I put down the tape and took a few steps toward the entrance. Then I stopped. My parents had the correct keys. They would not need to test several keys in the lock. My father had used the same front door key every day for years. Even in the dark, he could open that door without difficulty. Also, if it was one of my parents, they would have called out. They would have said my name or knocked. The person outside was doing neither. Scrape, pause, scrape. The sounds were slow and careful. Whoever stood outside did not seem nervous or rushed. They were not forcing the lock. They were patiently trying to find a key that worked. I stayed completely still. One hand rested on the VHS player. My shoulders were tight, and I was afraid to breathe too loudly. It was a foolish thought, but part of me believed that if I remained quiet enough, the person outside might think the house was empty and leave. The scraping suddenly stopped. The silence that followed felt worse. I stared at the front door, waiting for a knock. Nothing happened. I waited for a voice. Nothing. The bright living room lights reflected against the dark windows. The curtains were closed, but I imagined someone standing on the porch, watching the house and listening. Maybe I had misunderstood the sound. That was what I tried to tell myself. Maybe a branch had touched the door. Maybe something metal had fallen outside. Maybe the wind had moved one of the flower pots. Old houses made strange sounds all the time. Wood expanded and settled. Pipes clicked. Doors sometimes shifted in their frames. I had also watched a scary movie. Perhaps my mind was turning normal sounds into something frightening. I took a slow breath and tried to calm myself. Then, the front doorknob turned. It did not turn all the way. It only moved enough to make a small, unmistakable click. Every hair on my arms rose. My mouth became so dry that swallowing hurt. I stepped backward. The knob returned to its normal position. For several seconds, nothing moved. I could see the deadbolt above the handle. It was locked. My mother had checked it twice before leaving. The door should have been secure. Still, someone had just tested it. I continued backing away, placing one foot carefully behind the other. The cordless phone was on the coffee table. I needed to reach it. It was less than 10 feet away, but at that moment, the distance felt enormous. I was afraid that any movement would be heard through the door. The knob turned again. This time, it moved farther. The metal latch rattled inside the doorframe. The person outside pulled gently, then pushed. They were testing the door to see whether it would open. I rushed to the coffee table and grabbed the phone so quickly that I almost knocked it onto the floor. My hands were shaking. I pressed the talk button and stared at the keypad. I could not think clearly. Should I call my parents? I looked at the piece of paper where my father had written the restaurant number, but the numbers seemed to blur together. Should I call 911? What if it was only a neighbor? What if my parents had returned early and my father was using the wrong key by mistake? What if the police came, found nothing, and everyone laughed at me? I hated that I questioned myself. Someone was trying to open the door, yet part of me still worried about looking foolish. I had begged my parents to leave me alone. If I called the police because of a strange noise, they might never trust me again. At 15, embarrassment felt almost as frightening as danger. I stood in the middle of the living room, holding the phone against my chest. The house was silent again. No scraping, no movement from the knob. Nothing. I listened so hard that my ears began to ring. A full minute may have passed, although it felt much longer. I began to wonder whether the person had left. The front window was beside the door. Heavy curtains covered it from top to bottom. If I moved carefully, I could look outside and see who was on the porch. The idea terrified me, but not knowing felt worse. I placed the phone against my ear without dialing and slowly approached the window. The carpet felt soft beneath my feet. I moved one small step at a time, trying not to make the floor creak. The curtains were thick enough that nobody outside should have been able to see through them. Still, I imagined a face waiting inches away on the other side of the glass. I reached the window. My heart was beating so hard that I could feel it in my throat. Very carefully, I slipped one finger between the curtains and pulled them apart by less than an inch. The porch light was on. Its pale yellow glow covered the concrete steps, the welcome mat, the flower pots, and the white railing. Beyond the porch, the front yard disappeared into darkness. The street was empty. No cars were parked near our driveway. I looked to the left. No one. I looked to the right. No one. The porch was completely empty. I stayed there, looking through the small opening in the curtains. There was nowhere for a person to hide directly in front of the door. The bushes were farther away, and the porch light was bright enough that I would have seen someone moving toward them. For a few seconds, relief began to replace my fear. Maybe whoever had been there had left. Maybe it had been a prank. Some older teenagers could have run away when they heard me moving inside. I was about to close the curtains. Then, the doorknob turned again. It happened directly in front of me. I watched the silver handle move downward. I heard the metal latch strike the frame. The door shook slightly. But there was no one standing on the porch. No hand touched the knob. No arm reached from the side. No shadow crossed the door. Nothing. The knob moved on its own. I screamed. I stumbled backward, caught my leg against the coffee table, and fell hard onto the carpet. The cordless phone flew out of my hand and landed a few feet away. The doorknob immediately stopped moving. For one terrible moment, I remained on the floor, staring at the door and waiting for it to open. I thought the deadbolt might slide back by itself. I thought the door might slowly swing inward. I thought something I could not see was about to enter the room, but the door stayed closed. I crawled toward the phone, grabbed it with both hands, and dialed 911. I do not clearly remember what I said. I know the dispatcher asked for my address more than once because my voice was shaking. She asked whether I could see the person outside. I told her there was no person. She asked whether someone had entered the house. I said no. She told me to move away from the door and stay on the line. I sat on the floor near the couch, holding the phone against my ear and staring at the entrance. Every light in the house was already on, but I wished I could make the room even brighter. The dispatcher continued speaking to me in a calm voice. She asked whether the back door was locked. I said yes. She asked whether I could hear anything upstairs. I listened. The house was silent. She told me that officers were coming. I do not know how long it took them to arrive. It may have been only a few minutes, but it felt like an hour. When red and blue lights finally flashed through the curtains, I almost cried with relief. The officers knocked loudly and announced themselves. Even then, I did not open the door until the dispatcher confirmed that the police were outside. 2 officers entered the house. One stayed with me while the other walked around the property. My parents arrived soon afterward. My mother rushed inside and held me so tightly that I could barely breathe. My father spoke with the officers while repeatedly looking toward the front door. The police searched everywhere. They checked behind the bushes, beside the garage, along both sides of the house, and near the back fence. They shone flashlights across the yard and looked beneath the windows. They found nothing. There were no footprints in the flower bed. There were no marks around the lock. The door had not been damaged. The knob worked normally. One officer stood outside on the porch while the other remained inside. The officer inside turned the knob several times while his partner watched through the window. You would see someone's hand or arm, the officer said. There's no way to move this knob from outside without standing directly in front of the door. I wanted to tell him that I already knew that. I had been standing beside the window. I had watched the knob move. There had been nobody outside. The officers were kind, but I could tell they did not know what to believe. They suggested that someone might have been playing a prank and had run away before I looked. They said fear could make sounds seem louder, or movement seem different. My father examined the door himself. My mother kept asking me to describe exactly what had happened. I told them about the scraping. I told them about the knob turning. I told them that the porch had been empty. They listened, but I could see doubt in their faces. Eventually, everyone accepted the safest explanation. I had been alone. I had watched a frightening movie. I had heard ordinary noises and become scared. Once fear took control, my mind may have filled in the rest. I tried to believe that explanation, too. For a long time, I told myself that I had imagined the moving handle. Memories can change over the years. Perhaps I had looked outside, seen nothing, and then heard the knob move after stepping away from the window. Perhaps a person had been hiding just beyond my view. Perhaps a piece inside the lock had slipped. There had to be a reasonable answer. After that night, I refused to stay home alone for months. When I finally did, I kept the television low so I could hear every sound. I checked the front door repeatedly. Sometimes I stood beside it and stared at the knob, waiting for it to move. It never happened again while we lived there. Years passed. I grew older, moved away, and stopped talking about that night. Whenever I remembered it, I felt embarrassed by how frightened I had been. Eventually, my parents decided to sell the house. A young couple bought it. My mother met them during the sale and said they seemed friendly. They were excited about the large living room, the quiet street, and the porch. They lived there for less than 6 months. One afternoon, my mother saw the woman at a grocery store. Because it was a small town, they stopped to talk. They discussed ordinary things at first. My mother asked how the family was doing and whether they were enjoying the house. The woman gave a nervous little laugh. She said they were actually moving. My mother was surprised and asked why. The strangest thing keeps happening, the woman said. My mother waited. The woman explained that someone kept trying to unlock the front door at night. My mother later told me that her whole body went cold. The woman spoke as though it were only an odd story, something she might laugh about after leaving the house. She said it always began with a soft scraping sound, like someone testing different keys in the lock. Then the doorknob would move. Sometimes it turned slowly. Sometimes it shook so hard that the latch rattled inside the frame. Her husband had run outside several times, but he never found anyone. They had checked the yard. They had changed the locks. They had even installed a brighter porch light. Nothing helped. The sound always returned. My mother asked whether they had ever actually seen someone on the porch. The woman shook her head. "That's the strange part," she said. "Every time we look outside, there's never anyone there." My mother did not tell her about me. Not then. She simply stood in the grocery store and smiled while the woman described the same thing I had experienced years earlier. The same scraping, the same moving handle, the same empty porch. When my mother called and told me about the conversation, I felt 15 years old again. All the explanations I had forced myself to accept disappeared. I had not imagined it. Fear had not created the memory. Something had been at that door. I still do not know what it was. I do not know whether it wanted to enter the house or whether it only wanted the people inside to believe it was trying. Sometimes another thought bothers me even more. Maybe it was never outside at all. Maybe it had already been inside the house, standing somewhere behind me, turning the knob simply to make me look toward the empty porch. I have replayed that night in my mind hundreds of times. I remember the metal scraping. I remember the click of the latch. I remember the silver knob moving while the porch remained completely empty. I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And I know there was nobody standing outside that door. Story 3. It had been so long. At least that was the first thought that came to you. How long had it really been? Had it been hours, days, years? Maybe no time had passed at all. You could not tell. You did not even know where you were. Everything around you was dark, and the darkness felt thick, almost solid, as if it had weight. Where am I? Why is it so dark? The thoughts came slowly, one after another. They did not feel like thoughts you were choosing to have. They simply appeared inside your mind, quiet at first, then louder. Each question created another question, and none of them had answers. Then came the light. It was sudden, bright, and painful. You did not know where it came from. You sat upright in bed. The room around you was still dark. The curtains were closed, and only a thin line of gray light slipped through the edges. Your breathing was heavy. Your shirt clung to your chest with sweat, and your heart pounded hard enough to hurt. "Why that dream?" you whispered. The words left your mouth, but they did not seem important. You could already feel the memory slipping away. Whatever had frightened you was fading, breaking into pieces before you could fully understand it. You looked down. There was a glass in your hand. Cold water ran from the faucet into it, spilling over the rim and onto your fingers. You quickly turned off the tap. For a moment, you simply stood there, confused. A nice glass of water to calm the nerves, you told yourself. That made sense. You must have walked into the kitchen after waking from the drain. You were thirsty. That was all. You looked toward the window above the sink. Outside, everything was completely black. You could not see the yard. You could not see the wooden fence or the thick hedges that surrounded the back of the house. "Huh," you said quietly. "Can't even see the hedges out there. Must be late." You raised the glass and took a sip. The water was cold and clean. It moved over your tongue and down your throat, leaving behind a cool, comforting feeling. For a moment, it helped. Your heartbeat slowed. Then the thirst returned. You frowned and took another drink. It was not enough. You drank again, faster this time, until the entire glass was empty. Even then, your mouth felt dry. You placed the glass on the table and opened the refrigerator. The bright light inside made you blink. You reached past cartons, jars, and covered plates until you found a small box of fruit juice. Good thing the kids always ask for these, you said. I love them when I need something more refreshing. You closed the refrigerator door. When you turned around, the kitchen was gone. You were sitting on a picnic blanket. Warm sunlight touched your skin. A gentle breeze moved through the grass. Children laughed somewhere nearby, running through the open garden while adults sat in small groups, talking and smiling. These warm days were your favorite. The sun felt wonderful on your face. The air smelled like flowers, cut grass, and fresh fruit. Everyone seemed happy. Everyone loved days like this. You lifted the juice box and took a sip. The fruit punch was sweet and cold, exactly what you needed. You leaned back slightly and allowed the sunlight to warm your closed eyes. Everything was peaceful. Everything was safe. Then you looked down. You saw it. At first, you were not sure what it was. A dark shape stood at the edge of the garden, between two tall hedges. It looked like the entrance to an alley, but no alley should have been there. What is that? You asked. The moment the question left your mouth, you knew it was the wrong thing to say. Questions were dangerous here. They always led somewhere. You stood and stared at the opening. Why is that alley so black? You whispered. It's the middle of the day. The sunlight reached every part of the garden except that place. The darkness inside the alley was deep and complete. It looked empty, but it did not feel empty. You moved closer. When you reached the entrance, cold air touched your face. The darkness pressed against your chest. It felt like a hand slowly pushing inward, squeezing the air from your lungs. Pressure. You could not breathe. Fear rose in your stomach. There was nothing inside. Nothing at all. Then you saw the floor. Tiles, black and white tiles, continued into the darkness. Far away, a weak red light glowed. So the blackness had an end. You stepped forward. One step. Then another. There was no reason to turn around. Nothing was behind you. The passage was narrow. Brick walls stood close on both sides. The tiled floor felt cold beneath your feet. Do not look back. The thought appeared clearly in your mind. You are safe if you do not look back. You kept moving. You are safe if you move forward. The red light grew brighter. At the end of the passage, you entered a room. It was a kitchen. You knew that kitchen. It was the same kitchen you had grown up in. The cabinets were the same faded color. The sink was in the same place. The old wooden table stood near the wall. Even the small crack above the doorway was exactly as you remembered it. You understood where you were now. This was the place you went when you needed to be free. But it was not safe. You looked to the left. The garden was there. The door stood open, revealing flowers, hedges, lights, and a dark sky filled with beautiful stars. Do not look right. You knew something was standing there. You had already seen the garden. If you looked the other way, everything would change. You stepped forward before the thought could finish. You went into the garden. People filled the paths and open spaces. Everyone was enjoying themselves. You decided to walk through the place you knew so well, the place you had built piece by piece over many years. Children ran across the grass. Older people sat near the fountains. Small groups gathered beneath hanging lights. You had spent so long creating this place. Every hedge had been chosen carefully. Every flower had a meaning. The paths twisted through sections that held memories, ideas, and pieces of your life. The sky above was dark but not empty. Thousands of stars shone overhead, brighter than stars in the real world. Their light touched the trees and flowers with a soft silver glow. You saw the treehouse. It had always been your favorite place. You climbed, then jumped. Instead of falling, you flew. The feeling of freedom filled your body. You moved above the garden, over the hedges and paths, with nothing holding you down. You looked below. Everything was still there. It never left you. You loved this place. It was your safe haven. You could stay until everything outside was over. You only had to keep your phone. Your hand moved to your pocket. It was there. Good, as long as you had the phone, everything would be okay. You walked through the garden and spoke with the people you knew. You talked to the captain near the old bridge. You spoke to the doctor beside the fountain. You visited the mayor in the large house near the center of the garden. Each of them welcomed you. Each of them made you feel safe. You entered the metal maze that had frightened you when you were younger. The walls twisted and changed around you, but you did not panic. You knew how it worked now. At one point, you fell from the edge of a platform into empty space. You did not scream. You simply decided to return, and a moment later, you were standing safely on the platform again. That was how this place worked. It belonged to you. You saw the little ones playing beneath strings of colored lights. You saw the older ones checking the fences around the garden. Everything was right. Everything was where it should be. Then your hand moved to your pocket. The phone was gone. You froze. You checked again. Nothing. You searched your other pocket. Empty. How? You whispered. You had been careful. You had checked only moments ago. How could it be gone? No, you said. Your voice shook. Not now. Please, not now. You tried to calm yourself. You were fine. We are fine, you thought. You did not need it. The phone did not mean anything. Then you heard the screams. They came from somewhere beyond the hedges. High, desperate voices. You turned in circles trying to understand where they were coming from. Why? You called. No answer came. Where are you? The little ones were gone. The lights beneath which they had played were still swinging gently, but the paths were empty. Only the mayor remained. The treehouse was closed. Its windows were dark, and the ladder had disappeared. The doctor approached you with a serious expression. The fence is broken, he said. Why? He did not answer. What happened? The garden seemed to change around you. The paths became unfamiliar. The hedges grew taller. You wanted to find the stairs, but they were gone. You followed the hedges, hoping they would lead you back. Then, you realized you were inside them. Branches scratched your arms and pulled at your clothes. You had not wanted to enter the hedges. You knew why it had happened. The phone was gone. You had lost control. The garden was no longer listening to you. It's not working, you said. Your voice sounded small. You have no control now. The thought did not feel like your own. Why can I never leave here when I want to? The garden became darker. The stars disappeared one by one, as if they were going to sleep. Soon, the sky was empty. Only a red light remained. It shone from the doorway you had entered through. You stared at it. How would you return to this place? You knew the answer. The phone was gone. There was only one way out now. You had to return to the kitchen. But returning to the kitchen meant facing the other direction. You tried to remind yourself that you were strong here. Fear was not necessary. You had learned how this world worked. You knew what you could do. This place was yours. Then, why was the phone gone? You stood in the doorway. Red light washed over the kitchen. The black and white floor tiles looked as if they had been covered in blood. Loose wires hung from the ceiling, holding small red Christmas lights. She was there. Of course she was there. She was always there. Waiting, she stood on the far side of the room. She had no clear face. Her long, messy hair covered most of her head and shoulders. Her body was dark red, almost black beneath the shadows. The red lights outlined her shape and shone through the loose strands of her hair. Around her, the kitchen was ruined. The appliances were covered in rust. The wooden table had been broken in half. The walls were cracked and dirty. The home you remembered had been destroyed. The garden door was gone. She stood completely still, facing you. Do not look away. Do not move. Do not let her know you are there. Do not let her see you. She cannot be allowed to see. You held your breath. The door was to your right. The same door you had entered through. A trap, a promise of safety that had never been real. Do not look at it. Do not let your eyes move toward it. Do not let her see you look at it. You looked, only for a second. But you looked. You had made a mistake. She saw. Her mouth opened. The sound began. A terrible scream filled the kitchen. It was sharp enough to cut through your skull. You covered your ears, but it did nothing. The sound came from everywhere. It hurt. No. You shouted. Don't. This is my world, not yours. You tried to believe the words. Then a knife entered your stomach. The pain was immediate. Hot, burning, your body filled with nausea. You knew this pain, but you should not have known it. You should not have known what a knife felt like inside your body. She had not moved. The knife had moved by itself. Dozens more floated around her. Her mouth remained open. Then her eyes opened. They looked only at you. They were black, not dark brown or deep gray. Black, endless, empty, hateful black. What did I do? You cried. Why are you doing this? Why do you always do this? You looked down. The knife was still inside you. The pain was still real. You wrapped your hand around the handle and pulled. Blood poured from the wound. It ran warm across your stomach and down your leg. Your clothes quickly became wet and sticky. No, you thought. I am not powerless. You reached out your hand. You forced your will toward her. You imagined her being thrown across the room. Nothing happened. You commanded one of the knives to fly toward her. It did. The blade struck her body, but she did not react. You focused harder. Be crushed. The air around her bent and twisted. A familiar pressure formed around her body, strong enough to destroy anything else in the garden. She did not move, not even an inch. Am I powerless? The forbidden feeling entered your mind. Fear, the moment it appeared, the consequences followed. A blade cut your arm. Another sliced your leg. A third crossed your neck. Pain exploded through your body. She moved closer. Her mouth became wider. Her eyes grew darker and deeper. You had made another mistake. You had allowed fear into the world. The door. You thought about the door. You should not have done that. She grew larger. Her body filled the kitchen doorway behind her, stretching into the darkness. She still did not block your escape, but only because she wanted you to run. You turned and rushed toward the door. Two knives cut across your back. You screamed but kept moving. You reached the hallway, the narrow passage, the way you had come. If you could run far enough, you could escape through the other side. She would not be able to follow. Just do not look back. You looked back. She was there. She was coming. She was close. Her face had stretched into a long, twisted shape. Her black eyes seemed larger than before. Hair like tendrils whipped from her head, striking the brick walls and tearing pieces from them. Knives surrounded her. So many knives. Long, thin arms reached from the blackness behind her. They pulled her forward at an impossible speed. You started to believe you could not escape. You turned forward again. The end of the passage was near. Then you felt the first knife enter your back. 1 second followed. 2, then another. 3, 4, 5, 6, they would not stop. The blades buried themselves in your ribs, your spine, and the muscles of your back. Each step made them move. They tore through you as you ran. Your legs failed. You fell. But the floor was no longer beneath you. You dropped too far. Impossibly far. The darkness swallowed you. 7, 8 more knives struck as you fell. 9, 10, 11, 12. They would not stop. It would not stop. She would not stop. You turned in the air. At least you could defend yourself if you faced her. She was above you. Knives were held in her hands and wrapped inside the long strands of her hair. She followed you into the darkness. The blades flashed again and again. Then you hit the ground. The knives already buried in your body were pushed deeper. For some reason, you could still breathe. You did not have time to wonder why. She landed on top of you. Her impossible weight pressed your body against the floor. You could not stand. She raised another knife. You knew she would never stop. You lifted your arms and tried to block. The first blade struck your forearm. You pushed it away. Another came, then another. You batted the knives aside one by one. It was not working. Every blocked blade removed flesh. Skin peeled from your arms. Muscle fell away in wet pieces. You saw bone beneath your forearm. How can I still move? You thought. You did not care about the answer. You only wanted to keep fighting. Blood covered everything. She smiled. Terror filled you. Pure terror. You could not hold it back anymore. Why should you have to? How much pain were you expected to take? How long were you supposed to keep fighting? Still, you blocked. Every slash removed another piece of you. Every stab went deeper. The skin on the tops of your hands was gone. Your fingers were red and shining. Despair replaced fear. The pain began to disappear. Your body was too damaged to understand it. You continued fighting even after every part of your mind told you it was useless. Your arms became weak. I can't win, you thought. I can't even hope to survive. Then 20 knives entered your sides at the same time. You looked down. They were there, driven deep between your ribs, below your ribs. The handles were held by hands that could barely be called human. The air left your lungs. You felt pressure inside your chest. You could not breathe. You could not fight. You could see the blades. You understood what they meant. This was the end. You looked up. Her face hovered above yours. She smiled with joy, with kindness, with love. Her mouth was filled with sharp, uneven teeth. She leaned closer and took in a wet, rasping breath. I love you, she whispered. The words rattled from deep inside her throat. Then came the 21st knife. You saw it before you felt it. 2 pale gray hands held the handle. They were skeletal and old, with cracked skin pulled tightly over the bones. She placed all of her impossible weight behind the blade. It entered your chest. The pressure was terrible. The pressure. The pressure. The knife reached your heart. You shot upright in bed. Your mouth opened in a silent gasp. The room was dark. Your blankets were twisted around your legs. Sweat covered your body. Your hands shook as you pressed them against your chest. There was no blood, no knife, no wound, only the violent beating of your heart. You stared into the darkness, trying to understand where you were. The dream was already beginning to fade. The garden, the phone, the red kitchen, her face, her voice, all of it slipped away like water through your fingers. You took a slow breath, then another. Why that dream? You whispered. Story 4, I would like to remain somewhat anonymous, so you can call me Connie. I am 17 years old, and after thinking about everything that happened during my childhood, I have slowly come to the conclusion that I may have been a little haunted when I was younger. I have always been considered the weird one. I have been goth for about 6 years now, but even before that, I had unusual interests. I was obsessed with Halloween, horror movies, scary stories, online creepypastas, ghost hunting shows, and almost any kind of media connected to the supernatural. It was not only an interest I had online or through television, it also became an obsession with the occult in my real life. Before I tell these stories, I want to make something clear. Everything should probably be taken with a grain of salt. I have a very superstitious mind, and I also deal with OCD, ADHD, and an anxiety disorder. My anxiety has caused panic attacks, emotional instability, strange movements or tics, and even things that could be described as hallucinations. Because of that, I know there may be logical explanations for at least some of what happened. Still, when I put all these memories together, they are difficult for me to ignore. My family lives in Connecticut, in case the location adds anything to the story. For as long as I can remember, I have felt as though something else was around me. It was not always a clear figure or a voice. Most of the time, it was simply the feeling that another person was standing in the room with me, even when I knew I was alone. Sometimes it felt like several people were nearby, silently watching me. The oldest memory I can clearly remember happened when I was only 2 or 3 years old. I had just learned how to speak properly. Around that time, my parents moved into a new house and began renovating it while working in the basement. They discovered that one of the walls was hiding a small room. Nobody had told them the room existed. It had been completely sealed behind the wall. Even before they opened it, a terrible smell seemed to leak out from somewhere inside. When my mother finally broke through the wall, they found that the hidden room was full of old rubbish. There were bags of paper trash, children's clothing, toys, and other forgotten junk. Nothing inside looked valuable. It simply appeared as though someone had thrown a collection of old belongings into the room and sealed it shut. The moment my mother opened the wall, I began screaming. I was not only frightened, I was completely terrified. I cried so hard that my parents struggled to calm me down. Once I finally stopped screaming enough to speak, my mother asked me what was wrong. According to her, I looked toward the hidden room and whispered. Their daddy hid them inside there. I do not remember exactly what I thought I saw. I do not remember anyone telling me a story about children being hidden inside the room. I was far too young to understand what that sentence could mean. My parents were disturbed by what I said, but the renovations continued. The secret room was cleaned and repaired along with the rest of the basement. Even after it had been changed, I refused to go near that area. I avoided it whenever possible. For several years after that, I would often speak into a toy phone or stand facing a wall and have full conversations with nobody. When adults asked me who I was talking to, I would tell them that I was speaking with my ghost friends. I never described those ghosts as cruel or dangerous. They did not threaten me, and I did not seem frightened by them. To me, they were simply other children, or people who were around when nobody else could see them. When I tried to explain what they looked like, I compared them to the white ghost inside the crossed-out circle from the Ghostbusters logo. I was very young, and that image was probably the closest thing I knew that could help me explain what I thought I was seeing. By the time I was 7, the ghost friends had disappeared. I stopped talking to the walls and the toy phone. As I grew older, I convinced myself that I had invented them because I had an active imagination. That explanation made more sense to me than believing I had actually been speaking to spirits. Something else strange happened during the renovations. My parents were happy about their new home. It felt like a fresh beginning for them, and they were hoping to grow their family. About a month after the hidden room was opened, I walked up to my mother. At that time, she was not showing any visible signs of pregnancy. I touched her stomach and said, "Mommy, there's a baby in your belly. You know that, right?" My mother told me there was not a baby inside her. I continued to insist that there was. I even gently patted her stomach as though I already knew. To her surprise, she later discovered that she was pregnant. My sister was born 7 or 8 months after I made that statement. Within about a year, my mother became pregnant again. Once more, I told her before there were any clear signs. This pregnancy was different because I claimed there were 2 babies. I said they were twins, 1 boy and 1 girl. The boy would have been the first male child born in our generation of the family, while the girl would have been the 3rd daughter. I say the boy would have been because something happened one evening. I suddenly woke my mother while crying uncontrollably. I kept touching her stomach and saying, "The baby is missing. It's gone." My mother went to the hospital. After being examined, she was told that one of the twins was no longer there. The male baby had completely disappeared. There was no clear evidence left behind. The doctors believed the pregnancy had involved what is sometimes called a vanishing twin, in which one fetus is absorbed by the mother's body or by the other fetus. I had no medical knowledge at that age. I had no way of knowing that anything had changed before the hospital visit. Yet somehow, I woke up crying and said that one of the babies was gone. As I became older, the strange predictions and disturbing feelings slowly faded. Between the ages of 7 and 10, I do not remember many supernatural incidents. That period of my life was difficult for other reasons. My parents divorced, and we moved between several homes. There was a lot of confusion and stress. It is possible that everything happening around me kept my mind too busy to notice any strange feelings during the day. For a while, things seemed normal. Then the night terrors began. For almost a year, usually between 11 at night and 4 in the morning, I would get out of bed while still asleep. This happened at least once a week, and sometimes more often. My eyes would be open, and I could walk around the house, but my mind was still sleeping. The episodes were unpredictable. Sometimes I would do something ordinary, such as getting a glass of water. Other times I would scream, cry, run through the house, or become physically violent. I never remembered any of it after waking up. Most of what I know about those nights comes from stories my family later told me. During one family vacation in the Florida Keys, I left the place where we were staying and began wandering toward the beach in the middle of the night. I was asleep, but I moved as though I knew where I was going. Someone found me before I reached the water. On another night, I stood silently at the foot of my parents' bed. Crying, they asked me what was wrong, but I would not explain. I only stood there with tears running down my face. One of the worst episodes involved my sister. At the time, I slept in a loft bed, while my sisters used bunk beds nearby. During the night, I jumped from my loft bed onto the top bunk where my sister was sleeping. I began hitting her while screaming, "Get out of her." I attacked her badly enough to make her bleed. I have no memory of jumping across the room, climbing onto the bunk, or hurting her. I only know what my family told me afterward. During another episode, I screamed and cried about a volcano. I said the volcano was killing a huge number of wild dogs. I do not know where the image came from or why it frightened me so much. There were also nights when I ran through the halls of the house, screaming, "Get away," and leave me alone. Whatever I believed was chasing me existed only inside my sleeping mind, as far as I know. However, the terror was real enough to make me run and fight. I often woke up covered in bruises and scratches. The marks became so common and severe that teachers sometimes asked whether I was safe at home. Some of the injuries could probably be explained by me hitting furniture or scratching myself during the episodes. However, there were also mornings when marks appeared even though nobody had seen me move during the night. A few times, I woke up with small handprints on my arms. They looked like the prints of a child's fingers pressing tightly into my skin. I also suffered from chronic insomnia. Even when I was not sleepwalking, I struggled to rest. Part of me believes my anxious mind created terrible dreams that caused me to grab, scratch, or injure myself. That is still the most reasonable explanation I can think of, but the handprints remain difficult to explain. About 2 years after we had settled into that house, my family moved again. Our household included 3 girls, our mother, our stepfather, and our stepbrother. The previous house only had 3 bedrooms and no dining room, so it was no longer large enough for everyone. The new house became our current home. It was built more than 3 generations ago. Before we moved in, it had belonged to farmers who raised rabbits and tapped trees for syrup. The property sits on about 7 acres of land. At the far end of the land, there is a large brook. The house has an unfinished basement that my parents later turned partly into their bedroom. There is also a boiler room, 3 bedrooms, an office, 2 bathrooms, and large living areas. One of the strangest places in the house is a small basement room made from hard-packed dirt. It was originally used for canning, pickling, and storing food. The door to that room is now blocked by storage bins and locked twice from the outside. Even so, there has always been a wind chime hanging from the door handle. The previous owners specifically told us to leave the wind chime there. I do not know why. I have hated the house since the first moment we walked inside. As soon as I entered, I felt a slow, crawling sense of dread. The house looked normal, but something about it felt wrong. My bedroom was the hardest place for me to tolerate. It is on the 2nd floor and includes a walk-in closet. At the very back of the closet is a tiny door that reminds me of the little door from Coraline. It had been nailed shut. At one point, we managed to open it slightly. Behind it was only a small wooden box-like space. Inside, we found spare screws and an old candy wrapper. There was no hidden tunnel or secret room, but the door still disturbed me. The bedroom itself was beautiful. Yet I lost a great deal of sleep there during my preteen years. At night, I would hear soft footsteps and scratching noises moving across the ceiling. The sounds only stopped when someone struck the ceiling with a broom handle. I repeatedly dreamed about a girl crawling across my ceiling and watching me while I slept. In the dream, she moved above me like an insect, keeping her face turned toward my bed. I would wake up frightened and look at the same ceiling where I had seen her crawling only moments earlier. The walk-in closet was also strange. It remained about 5 to 10 degrees colder than the rest of the bedroom. This happened even during hot summer weather. The closet had no clear opening to the outdoors that could explain the cold air. After we moved into the house, several uncomfortable incidents happened. One evening, I came home from middle school and opened my closet. Inside, I discovered several deep scratches across the wall. The marks were about 6 inches long. They were far from any clothes hangers or shelves that could have fallen and damaged the paint. Nothing was lying on the floor beneath them. The scratches ran from the upper left side of the wall toward the middle right, as though something had dragged sharp claws across the surface. They were a few millimeters deep and were covered with a black, soot-like substance that looked similar to charcoal. My family eventually painted over the marks. The moment I first saw them, however, my body went cold. When I touched one, a sudden spark of dread appeared in my stomach. It felt like an instinctive warning telling me that I should not be standing there. Another incident happened to our babysitter, whom I will call Kyle. Each morning, Kyle helped us get ready for school. After we boarded the bus, he would let the dogs outside before leaving for work. He did not tell us what happened until several years later, when he mentioned it during a family party. One morning, after all the children had left on the bus, Kyle was walking through the main hallway. When he reached the kitchen, he saw a dark figure coming down the stairs. The figure then dropped onto all fours. It crawled across the floor toward the basement steps and moved down them like a cat. Kyle said it was too small to be our black Labrador, but it was too large and too dark to be our calico cat. Whatever it was, it moved quickly and disappeared into the basement. A moment later, Kyle heard the wind chime on the dirt room door ring. He immediately ran out of the house. He was so frightened that he did not even stop to lock the doors. I had an encounter in the kitchen as well. I was emptying food scraps from a bowl near the sink into the garbage can when I suddenly felt that familiar bolt of dread in my stomach. I looked toward the hallway. A figure about my height was peeking around the corner. I was around 5 feet 2 inches tall at the time. I only saw it for a moment. As soon as I noticed it, it pulled back and disappeared from view. A wave of nausea hit me. I dropped the bowl and ran outside to find my mother. She did not believe that I had seen anything. Another incident happened while I was writing something on the calendar in the kitchen. Without warning, that same creeping feeling returned. I looked around but saw nothing. The dread became so powerful that I began crying even though I did not know why. The feeling was difficult to explain. It was partly like the watery pressure in your eyes just before you sneeze. At the same time, it felt like the fear of knowing you were in serious trouble with your parents and were waiting for them to confront you. I called the dog into the kitchen because I wanted him near me. He refused to approach. Instead, he stared at the wall directly behind me. The hair along his back rose, and he began growling and barking at the empty space. I did not want to turn around. The incidents became less common when I reached 8th grade. Since then, the activity inside the house has mostly stopped. However, I still experience sudden feelings of dread before major events. One of my great-grandmothers lived in Arizona and had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. I knew she would probably pass away within a few months. About a week before her death, without receiving any new information, I suddenly felt that same sick, heavy dread. The feeling became much worse 2 days before another of my great-grandmothers was found dead during the same week. It happened again several days before I learned that the father of one of my closest friends had been diagnosed with cancer. I felt it again only hours before discovering that a friend's pet had died. The next example may sound unbelievable, and I understand why someone might think I was making it up. On September 9th, 2025, I was overwhelmed by the feeling again. For no clear reason, I suddenly began thinking about Charlie Kirk. I do not normally think about him. I started wondering why nobody had ever attempted to kill him, or at least physically attack him, because he was such a high-profile public figure. I posted on my Instagram story, "Ever think about how weird it is that nobody's tried to kill such a high-profile person like Kirk?" The thought was completely random for me. It would have been like watching one movie with Andrew Garfield and then suddenly spending an entire day thinking about him for no reason. Less than 13 hours after I made the post, I saw the news reporting Kirk's assassination. Sometimes the feeling comes before smaller events, such as surprise quizzes at school. Other times, it comes before major news. The worse the event is, the stronger the dread usually feels. Recently, I have been experiencing it again. This time, it comes with the sensation that I am being watched. I also feel as though someone is thinking about me far too much, although I have no way to know whether that is true. I also have another story that feels less like a haunting and more connected to witchcraft. My great-uncle from Arizona has a girlfriend who considers herself a witch. She is originally from Connecticut, and they often travel together. During one visit, she came to my mother's brother's house to see us. She had brought a deck of tarot cards with her. Before doing any readings, she showed everyone the cards. Almost immediately, my mother's sister-in-law crossed the room and picked up a painting I had made the week before. I do not normally paint. I had simply felt a strong urge to create that particular image. The painting showed an eye with 3 irises inside a galaxy-like background. My aunt brought the painting over and showed it to my great-uncle's girlfriend. Both women looked shocked. Without ever seeing the tarot deck before, I had painted almost the exact same design that appeared on the backs of the cards. I had made the painting 1 week before meeting her. After seeing it, she asked whether she could perform a tarot reading for me. I do not remember every card she drew, but I remember one clearly. It showed a girl holding 2 cats. The card was upright. The girl in the image wore a dress very similar to the one I was wearing that day. She also had hair that looked like mine. The 2 cats beside her were calicos, just like my own cats. The entire room became silent for a moment. Then the reading continued. Most of the remaining cards seemed normal and did not cause the same reaction. At the end, the general conclusion was that I had some kind of unusual energy. My great-uncle's girlfriend told me, "There is something about you that I can feel. There is something inside you that we can't see." That was my first experience with tarot cards, and it was more than enough to make me interested in learning how to read them myself. I now perform tarot readings for other people. My readings are often accurate enough to make them uncomfortable. More than once, people have become disturbed by what I told them. One person even cried and said that I should not have known the things I knew. I also perform cleansing rituals, but despite all of this, I do not fully believe in religion, witchcraft, or supernatural powers. I know that may sound strange. I use tarot cards, I've experienced things that I cannot explain, and I sometimes feel warnings before terrible events. Yet I still feel more comfortable believing in things that can be tested and explained through science. I do not like stepping too deeply into mysterious waters when I cannot prove what is beneath the surface. Maybe my childhood imagination created the ghost friends. Maybe my anxiety caused the feelings of being watched. Maybe the night terrors, scratches, bruises, and handprints were all caused by sleepwalking. Perhaps the cold closet has poor insulation, and the scratching in the ceiling came from animals. The predictions could have been coincidences, and the tarot reading may have only seemed personal because I was searching for connections. Those are the explanations I try to accept. However, no rational answer fully explains everything. It does not explain why I screamed when the hidden room was opened, or why I said someone's father had hidden children inside it. It does not explain how I knew my mother was pregnant before she knew herself. It does not explain why I woke up crying that one of the twins had disappeared before the hospital confirmed it. It does not explain the small handprints on my arms, the dark figure Kyle saw crawling into the basement, or the wind chime ringing on the door the previous owners told us never to remove. It does not explain the figure peeking around the kitchen corner, or why our dog refused to approach me while growling at the wall behind my back. Maybe every event has a separate, reasonable explanation. When they are viewed together, though, they form a pattern that is difficult to dismiss. I still do not know whether I was haunted as a child. Perhaps I was only anxious, imaginative, and highly sensitive to the behavior of people around me. Maybe I noticed small details without understanding that I had noticed them, and my mind turned those details into predictions. Or perhaps something really was following me. Whatever the truth is, I no longer feel the activity as strongly as I once did. The ghost friends disappeared, the night terrors stopped, and the house has become quieter. Most days I live a normal life. Still, the feeling sometimes returns. It begins as a cold pressure in my stomach. Then comes the sense that someone is standing nearby, just outside my view. My eyes begin searching corners, open doors, mirrors, and dark hallways, even though I have not heard anything. Sooner or later, something usually happens. It may be small, or it may be terrible. Until then, I can only wait and go with the flow. Sometimes the flow is calm. Sometimes it is frightening. And sometimes it feels as though it already knows what is coming before I do. Story 5. I have pulled more than 4,000 baby teeth in my career, maybe closer to 5,000 by now. After 22 years in the same dental practice, you stop counting every tooth and start counting the faces instead. My office sits in an old strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation place that changes its name every spring. The nail salon always smells like chemicals and artificial fruit. The tax office covers its windows with bright signs from January to April, then disappears until the following year. My practice has remained exactly where it is through all of it. Same waiting room chairs, same faded fish tank, same little basket of plastic rings and stickers for children who behave well during their appointments. When you work with children for that long, you learn things about them that their parents never do. Children talk when they are sitting in a dental chair. I think it is because you are already inside their mouths, so there is nothing left for them to hide. They cannot run away. They cannot look at their phones. They are trapped under the bright light while you clean their teeth. And sooner or later, the truth starts coming out. Parents usually wait near the front desk, scrolling through their phones or reading old magazines. Meanwhile, their children tell me everything. They tell me about the dog that got hit by a car and how their father cried when he buried it. They tell me about the uncle nobody talks about anymore. They tell me which parent drinks too much and which one sleeps on the couch. They talk about bullies, secret pets, missing homework, broken windows, and strange noises in the house. Once, a little girl told me there was something living in her closet, but only on Sundays. I have heard hundreds of stories like that. Most of them are imagination. Some are dreams. A few are misunderstandings that sound terrifying only because children do not have enough words to explain what really happened. Every now and then, though, a child says something that stays with you. That was what happened with Nolan Pruitt. Nolan was 7 years old when he first told me that the Tooth Fairy left him notes instead of money. I did not think much of it at first. Kids make things up all the time. They decorate ordinary stories until they become something magical or frightening. $1 under the pillow becomes a gold coin. A shadow in the hallway becomes a ghost. A sound outside the window becomes a woman scratching at the glass. So when Nolan mentioned the notes, I smiled and asked him what they said. That was when he did something I had never seen a child do during an examination. He closed his mouth. I was in the middle of checking his back teeth. The suction tube was still hooked over his lower lip. My mirror was near his cheek. Yet Nolan shut his mouth firmly and shook his head. Not quickly, not playfully. He closed it with purpose. His mother was standing in the doorway. She laughed when she saw him refusing to answer. She told me they had done the whole Tooth Fairy tradition properly. They used gold dollar coins from the bank. Nolan had been excited about it for weeks. She said they even made a tiny envelope with his name on it. While she spoke, Nolan looked at me. He did not look at his mother. He did not look embarrassed. He stared directly into my eyes as though we were sharing a secret she did not understand. At the time, I thought he was enjoying the attention. Children sometimes like knowing something adults do not. It makes them feel powerful. I finished the examination and told his mother everything looked normal. At checkout, Nolan stood close beside me while his mother spoke to the receptionist. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He opened his hands carefully and showed it to me the way a child might show someone a beetle he was afraid would escape. The paper was small and soft from being folded many times. The writing was even smaller. The letters were packed tightly together in dark, cramped rows. I could barely make out the shapes. Whoever had written it had pressed so hard that the paper had torn in 2 places. The marks did not look like normal ink. They were darker in the center of every line, almost as if something had been rubbed into the paper. I leaned closer and asked Nolan what the note said. He folded it immediately and put it back into his pocket. "It's for me," he said. Then, he told me the Tooth Fairy whispered when she reached under his pillow. He said she called him a name that was not his real name. What bothered me most was that Nolan was not afraid. He looked proud. I have a personal rule about not trying to diagnose parents based on what their children say. I also try not to interfere with family traditions unless I see clear signs that a child is being harmed. There was no injury, no fear, and no reason to believe anything serious was happening. Children invent things. Children lie beautifully, constantly, and often for reasons that make complete sense to them. I finished the rest of my appointments that day. I drove home, ate dinner, watched television with my wife, and forgot about Nolan Pruitt. For almost 4 months, I did not think about him at all. Then, his mother called. She said Nolan had a loose tooth and asked whether I could fit him in. Loose teeth are my entire profession. Parents call about them every week. Most of the time, they do not even need an appointment. Baby teeth loosen, wobble for a while, and eventually fall out. But Nolan's mother sounded strange. Her voice was too controlled. She kept pausing between sentences as though she was trying not to frighten herself. I told her to bring him in that afternoon. When Nolan sat in the chair, he looked healthy. He had grown a little taller. He smiled at me as if we were old friends. I put on my gloves and examined the tooth his mother was worried about. It was number 19. A first permanent molar. Dentists sometimes call them 6-year molars because they usually appear around the age of 6. They are not baby teeth. They do not fall out and get replaced. They are meant to stay in the mouth for the rest of a person's life. Nolan's number 19 had erupted perfectly 14 months earlier. I knew because I had examined it myself. It had been strong, healthy, and exactly where it should be. Now, it moved under my finger like a fence post pushed into wet mud. There was no decay, no injury, no swelling, no infection, no gum disease, which Nolan was about 20 years too young to have anyway. I took an X-ray and stared at the image for several minutes. The root was disappearing. There are medical reasons why tooth roots sometimes break down or resorb. Trauma can cause it. Infection can cause it. Certain rare conditions can cause it. But none of those explanations fit Nolan. His body seemed to have received instructions to give the tooth back. I referred him to a specialist. I wrote detailed notes in his file. I took another X-ray to make sure the first image had not been distorted. I sent copies to a colleague and asked for a second opinion. Then I told myself it was simply one of those unusual cases that might end up in a medical journal one day with a title full of long Latin words. That explanation helped for a while. Then, Addison Velasquez came in. Addison was 9. Her upper lateral incisor was loose. It was an adult tooth, healthy, perfectly clean, and moving. Then came the Kowalski twins. Both of them had permanent teeth loosening without any clear medical cause. Then there was Deacon. I still feel sick when I open his file. His mother brought him to me because he had started pulling out his own teeth. Not baby teeth, healthy adult teeth. She said he worked on them for weeks. He wiggled them at the dinner table. He pushed them with his tongue while watching television. He twisted them with his fingers in the car. He was never impatient. He never complained about the pain. He was calm and determined. Patient as a saint, his mother said. When one finally came free, Deacon would run to his bedroom as though it were Christmas morning. His mother had found blood on his pillow more than once. She had found teeth inside his pillowcase. She had tried to stop him, but he always started again when she was not watching. When I got him alone in the chair, I asked him why. At first, he smiled. Then I asked whether someone had left him a note. His smile widened. Every child told me the same thing once I learned how to ask. The notes came after the last baby tooth. That was the beginning. The final tooth of childhood would come loose and be placed beneath the pillow. The parents would leave a coin, a bill, or a small gift. But at some point during the night, another note would appear. Sometimes the child found it beneath the pillow. Sometimes it was folded inside the pillowcase. Once the boy said he woke with the note pressed between his lips. After that, the adult teeth began to loosen, one by one. The children were never frightened. They were excited. They worked their teeth loose willingly. They twisted them, pushed them, and waited for them to fall free. The pain did not seem to bother them. The bleeding did not frighten them. To them, every lost tooth was a payment, and they were happy to pay. I started keeping a folder. I know how that sounds. A dentist secretly collecting records about children missing teeth and notes from the tooth fairy sounds like the beginning of a police investigation. I understood that. I knew what it might look like if another doctor found it. I kept the folder anyway. Over 3 years, I recorded 11 cases. The pattern was clear enough to graph. It always started with the final baby tooth. That tooth was the door. Once it went under the pillow, the notes began. Then the permanent teeth started loosening. No infection, no injury, no common condition connecting the children. Different schools, different neighborhoods, different family backgrounds. Some parents used coins, some used cash, some left toys or candy. One family did not believe in the tooth fairy at all, but the child's grandmother had placed the final tooth under the pillow as a joke. It did not matter. Once the tooth was offered, something answered. The notes continued until the teeth ran out. Then they stopped. Harper Brandt was the oldest child in my folder. She was 12 when her mother brought her in to discuss partial dentures. That is a conversation I usually have with people in their 70s, not with 7th graders. Harper had lost most of her permanent teeth. The remaining ones were weak and loose. Her gums were pale, but otherwise healthy. Nothing in her blood work explained it. Nothing in her medical history made sense. She sat through the entire consultation with her hands flat on her thighs. She did not speak. Her mother cried quietly while I explained treatment options, costs, insurance limitations, and what might happen next. I tried to be gentle, but there is no gentle way to tell a mother that her 12-year-old daughter may need dentures. Eventually, Harper's mother stepped into the hallway to call the insurance company. As soon as the door closed, Harper looked at me. "Do teeth ever grow in a third time?" she asked. Her voice was very quiet. I wanted to lie to her. For a moment, I thought about telling her that sometimes strange things happened, that medicine was always improving, that there might be some new treatment in the future. Instead, I told her the truth. "No," I said, "what you have is what you have." Harper did not cry the way children usually cry in my office. There was no loud sobbing, no anger, no shaking shoulders. Her face remained completely still. Her eyes simply filled with tears, and the tears rolled down her cheeks. "The notes stopped in March," she said. I did not answer. The whispering stopped, too. I moved closer and asked what the voice had said to her. Harper looked down at her hands. "I can't remember the name she called me anymore," she whispered. "I keep trying to hear it in my head, but it's gone." Her lower lip trembled. Then she said something I have never forgotten. I really liked who I was when she said it. Her mother returned before I could ask anything else. After that appointment, I began driving past the Brandt house. I do not know why. It was not on my way home. I had to turn off the main road and drive almost 10 minutes out of my way to reach it. The house looked ordinary. Small front yard, gray siding, 2 cars in the driveway, plastic toys near the porch steps. The porch light was always on. Morning, evening, rain, sunlight, it did not matter. Once, I passed the house at 2 in the afternoon on a bright summer day, and the porch light was still burning. I told myself the family had simply forgotten to switch it off. I did not believe that. This is where I need to tell you about my daughter. Her name is Wren. She is 6 years old. 3 weeks ago, she came running into the garage while I was fixing a loose shelf. She had her tongue pressed against her lower front tooth and was grinning like she had won a prize. Dad, look. Her first tooth was loose. Lower central incisor. Exactly on schedule. I stood there with a socket wrench in my hand and felt my whole body go cold. For 3 years, I had known this day would come. For 3 years, I had rehearsed what I would say and what I would do. That evening, my wife and I sat Wren down at the kitchen table. We told her the truth. Gently, we explained that the tooth fairy was only a story. It was a nice story parents told children to make losing teeth feel fun instead of frightening. There was no tiny woman flying into bedrooms. There was no magic exchange under the pillow. When her tooth came out, we said, we would place it in a special box so she could keep it forever. She would still receive $1. The money would come directly from us. No pillow, no secret visitor, no middleman. Wren took the news better than I expected. Children handle the truth better than adults think they will. She asked whether Santa Claus was also a story. My wife changed the subject before I could answer. The tooth came out on a Tuesday evening during dinner. Wren bit into a piece of garlic bread, stopped chewing, and reached into her mouth. The tooth sat in her palm, shining with saliva and a tiny dot of blood. She was delighted. My wife helped her rinse it under the kitchen tap. Then, we placed it inside a small tin box decorated with painted flowers. I carried the box to Wren's room and put it on her dresser. The dresser stood on the opposite side of the room from her bed. That placement was deliberate. The tooth was not under her pillow. It was not near her pillow. It was not hidden in the sheets, tucked inside a shoe, or placed on a windowsill. Nothing had been offered. Whatever arrangement the other families had entered into, we had refused, formally and completely, as far as I was concerned. I left $1 beside the tin box before Wren went to sleep. She hugged me and thanked me. For the first time in 3 weeks, I felt as though I could breathe. 2 nights later, I woke at 3 in the morning. At first, I did not know what had disturbed me. The house was quiet. My wife was asleep beside me. Rain tapped softly against the bedroom window. Then I heard Wren talking. Her room was across the hallway. Her voice was low and happy, the same voice she used when speaking to her stuffed animals. I could hear the rise and fall of her words. Then a pause. Then she spoke again.